Hello, and welcome to the weekly voice chats for the Men's Humans Rights Discord server. We are the semi official server of the Men's Rights subreddit. This week's topic: does feminism help men? And this is a common point of debate and contention between men's rights activists and feminists. And I'm going to give my personal opinion before opening the floor, although my guess is most of the people here would agree, is that feminism not only fails to help men, but feminism is one of the biggest enemies that the modern day Western man has. And I say that because as a men's rights activist, when I do try and talk about men's issues, and when I follow efforts to pass legislation to fix discrimination against men, such as fighting against unequal pension ages, such as fighting against male-only conscription, the biggest opponent that we have, the biggest objection that we get, the biggest protests that we face come from feminists. There is no other group more against the men's rights movement than feminists. So when feminists say they help men too, how can you say that you help men when you are against the men's rights movement? Now, of course, feminists hide behind the excuse that, well, we don't need a men's rights movement because feminism is enough to help men too, which to me fails for two reasons. Because first of all, men's issues should not be decided by a women's movement. It should not be up to a women's movement to decide what men's issues are and how those men's issues should be addressed. Imagine if MRA said, well, it should be up to the men's rights movement to dictate to women what issues they have and how they should be fixed. It would be ridiculous. So why do feminists take it upon themselves to say, we get to define toxic masculinity, we get to identify what male issues are, and we get to identify how to best solve them? The second reason why that fails for me, the answer that, well, we don't need a men's rights movement because feminism helps men too, is because we look at what feminists actually do. And again, to repeat, whenever there's legislation to fix discrimination against men, more often than not, the biggest voice in protest, in opposition, are feminist organizations such as the National Organization for Women in the US, such as the Fawcett Society in the UK. And you might be a feminist listening to this right now saying, well, that's not how I feel. I would support laws that end discrimination against men. Here's the problem, though. You have to pay attention to what these organizations are doing, these organized political lobby groups. What do they actually do when they go before Congress or when they go before Parliament? Because it's not helping men. And lastly, the biggest myth, and I'm actually having an ongoing debate right now with this feminist user on TikTok, a very common line that feminists will use is they'll say, oh, well, feminism is helping men by dismantling the patriarchy and fighting against oppressive gender roles that restrict men's roles in society, which again, I have two problems with. First of all, that's not even true, because when feminists protest against gender-neutral domestic violence laws, for example, let's take in the UK recently in 2020, the domestic abuse bill, where feminist organizations were opposed to the domestic violence law being written in a gender-neutral way. In other words, they were against male victims of domestic violence having equal status under the law. How is that not directly perpetuating the stereotype that men are the sole abusers and women are the sole victims, and that men are inherently stronger than women? So when feminists support gendered policies, such as the United Nations World Food Program, they have a policy where food is exclusively distributed to women. The only time it doesn't happen is when they're in a traditional Islamic area where it's tradition for the men to leave the home. But it's very common to see the UN set up food distribution centers that, quote, prioritize women and children, which what that does in effect is leave men to starve. When feminists say that homeless women should be given priority for shelters and public housing because they're more vulnerable, again, is that not perpetuating gender stereotypes and gender norms? So when feminists talk about toxic masculinity and how they're against the idea of toxic masculinity, it's feminists who say that male victims of domestic violence don't need equal protection under law because as men, they can't be quote unquote true victims. And they may throw in a token line saying, oh yes, we do acknowledge that sometimes, yes, men can be victims, and they always have that token line that they can point to and say, no, we're not saying that men can't be victims. But again, actions speak louder than words. And there's a concept called de facto versus de jure. De facto meaning what actually happens in the real world, and then de jure meaning, well, what do they write down on a piece of paper? Because feminists write down all kinds of things on paper that sound great. They support equality, they're against patriarchy, which is something that they've taken upon themselves to define without input from men themselves, and they're against oppressive gender roles. So there's an article right now, 23 Ways Feminism Has Made the World a Better Place for Men, which I think Title IX is going to read some of it for us, where feminists are listing all these claims that they do for men. But the problem is, none of it's reflected in the real world. And this is, if a feminist watching this right now, this is an honest question to you. Show me what tangible effort, what specific effort are you making to help men or to solve a men's rights issue? Say, boys' education gap, or the male homeless gap, or unequal pension ages if it's a country that has unequal pension. I mean, show me what are you specifically doing, because I can show you dozens of examples of feminists fighting against equality in those issues. I could show you examples. I experience them every single day. Simply being an MRA gets me attacked by feminists. Why? Why are feminists so afraid of the men's rights movement even existing? Is it because they want to have a monopoly on the conversation where therefore they can control the narrative on who's being discriminated against, how and why, and how to solve it? And thus, if feminists control the conversation on male issues, they get to decide when and how and if male issues are getting addressed. So, I don't think it's really possible to cover this whole topic in an hour-long talk. I mean, it would take years to really literally years to unravel every single instance around the world of feminists in different countries and different political systems fighting against the equality for men and boys. But I'm sure everyone here has both personal examples of times when they've witnessed feminists directly perpetrating misandry and discrimination against men and boys. And we have this article as well. I am going to open the floor. So thank you for coming. And we do this every week, every Friday or Saturday. Usually the schedule is announced in the server a few days beforehand. So the floor is open.
Thank you, Blue. Now, we are just going to go through this article essentially and talk about their points. And some of them are going to be easier to digest than others, let's say. But we're just going to go through it. And Title IX, if you wanted to start off, would you like to read the intro to the article?
Sure, the 23 Ways article. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Give me a sec. Oh god. Okay. When you think about feminism, the first thing that comes to mind probably isn't men. But it's strange that most of us perceive gender equality as only uplifting ladies, when the women's liberation actually had a lasting impact on us all. According to Fox News, the empowerment of women is a threat to national security, causes boys utter failure in school, and has turned men into weeps and wussies, as well as slackers. Female breadwinners are also apparently a quote-unquote problem. Well, that's only one way of seeing it. Another is to look at the host of ways that feminism has actually made the world a nicer place to live for everyone. Since Zerlina Maxwell so brilliantly explained how the movement has helped women, let's look at 23 ways it impacts men. And then the first example is that it gave our economy a huge, long-lasting boost. It says women's integration in the workforce after World War II translated into massive macroeconomic gains. Given that ladies made up approximately half the workforce, their integration had huge positive ripple effects in all industries, and we shouldn't stop there. Incorporating even more women in the workforce can help keep our economy vibrant. According to The Economist, the empowerment of career women is one of the most defining changes in the industrialized world. Goldman Sachs calculates that, leaving all other things equal, increasing women's participation in the labor market to male levels will boost GDP by 21% in Italy, 19% in Spain, 16% in Japan, and 9% in America, France, and Germany, and 8% in Britain.
And also keep minimum wage the same since like 1970. So that's what they don't tell you, is that this is one of the reasons that minimum wage is so low, is because after women leapt into work, there was a period where everyone were, there were more workers, and like everyone was getting paid the same, but then wages just sort of stagnated and stopped going up. And because you doubled the workforce, you now have so many more people that your employers can choose from, which means that essentially it's now a buyer's market as far as employment goes. That means lower wages for everyone. But I'm not actually going to argue against this one particularly strongly, because I mean, while it was entirely the case that there were female doctors and there were female nurses and female women working in factories, all sorts of things like that before World War II. After World War II, there was a big push to get women into work. What they will leave out is that it was largely because the government wanted more people working, and employers wanted more people working, and they realized that women had proven that they could work in factories by building bombs for the Allies and things like that. So while feminism may have played a role there, it's highly likely that this would have happened regardless of what activism they did, because they were essentially like patsies, really. Like a lot of big interests have always used feminism to drive what they want. So you'll notice that when feminism does something, it often benefits corporations. So getting more women into work is one of those things, and it has actually driven down female happiness. I'm not actually going to argue whether or not this was a good thing for men, because honestly, it's highly debatable, I think, because men's wages and men's unemployment has gone up drastically. And actually, yeah, I will argue against this, because there have been studies recently that have said that women are more likely to be employed, and they are more likely to get a job with the same CV. So if you give an employer two different CVs, two identical CVs with different names, one's a man, one's a woman, the woman is much more likely to get hired. So
I can actually say I saw that post. I know the post you're talking about on Reddit, but I actually literally did that myself in Los Angeles and got exactly the same result. So I can say first-hand experience that that's true.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the post. I was talking about actual studies. But yeah, it is true. If you can try it for yourself. Get your CV, put a woman's name on it, and spread it around, and just count how many more phone calls back you get, and so on. It's
another thing that they conveniently ignored was the massive increase in population after the war.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, they're talking about more people entering the workforce. Yeah, that's because there's just more people in general. I mean, you can sit there and say that it's because women are entering the workforce, but it's also just because you have more bodies overall. When you have a large population increase, yeah, the economy usually goes up, which is why you see a lot of countries with massive populations have some of the highest GDPs when they utilize that workforce properly. Look at China, which is like the second highest GDP in the world, I think. And I mean, one of the reasons why their economics are the way that they are is because of their population and how they utilize them in the workforce. It's not because there's more women, it's just because there's more people in general. They just throw as many bodies at it as they can. So, you know,
And
like Mentor Human was
similar.
saying, is
I
sorry,
was
I was
gonna say
just
there
going to
was.
say,
Go on.
go ahead. No, I was just going to say,
Uh,
I think it was a combination of factors. I don't think it was just one thing.
right, and I was going to say to your point when you said it was just part of the population increase. There was a similar disingenuous effort during COVID to say that more women than men lost their jobs. But that ignores the fact that more women than men had jobs in the first place because men have a higher unemployment rate. So more women lost jobs because more women had jobs to lose. And that was presented as if it was, oh, the misogyny of COVID layoffs, when in fact it's the reverse. It shows that men have less jobs in the first place to lose. So of course women lost more jobs. And that's being presented as, oh, women lost their jobs at a higher rate than men. No, women lost their jobs at an equal or lower rate than men, but the total number of female jobs lost was a higher number. Feminists do the same
Okay,
trick.
sorry, go on, finish your thought. We've got to move on to
Okay.
the next one. Got to get through that.
Feminists use the same number trick with women's heart disease being worse than men's heart disease. They use the same trick for prostate cancer not being all that deadly. There's always feminists will mix up percents and total numbers at will whenever it's convenient to their narrative.
Okay, that's probably a good idea to move on to the next one, although it's kind of an awkward one to talk about. If you could just read the title rather than doing the whole one. Actually, let's not read that one because it's kind of all about bedroom stuff. So this we're trying to keep a fairly family friendly sort of show, even if we talk about some dark things. So maybe we should move on to number 3. Though,
Okay.
honestly, I don't think it's a very good point, and it's a very debatable one. Like,
No,
achieve better relationships is kind of, yeah. Okay, go on. Number 3.
number 3 says, it successfully overturned laws that discriminate against men. As gender discrimination became more and more popular topic of discussion in the 1970s, people began noticing traces of unequal treatment in other aspects of American law. In 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional to treat women and men differently under the law. The case Craig v. Boren was filed by a plaintiff in Oklahoma over its gender-specific drinking age policy, which prohibited men from drinking before age 21, but allowed women to drink when as young as 18. This implied that men were inherently more reckless and women were more responsible. After the law was struck down, the drinking age became 21 for all. According to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the ruling determined much more than Oklahoma's drinking age. It determined that the quote familiar stereotype, the active boy, aggressive and assertive, the passive girl, docile and submissive, was not fit to be written into law. So the next time you're drinking, raise a glass in honor of RBG.
Oh, okay, but what I'm not seeing here is what feminists did to actually push this through. What did feminists actually like? What's the thing they did? Were they campaigning outside the courthouse? What? Because it sounds an awful lot like a guy called Craig just wanted to, thought it was very unfair that he wasn't allowed to drink when women were, and he'd see his female friends and so on around him sipping glasses of wine and stuff like that, and be like, I want to do that. Why can't I do that? I mean, I'm forced to go off to war. I'm forced to do all this sorts of stuff. Like this, I can't remember if this was before or after Vietnam. I can't remember the year Vietnam was in, but it was about that sort of time. And so, like, this guy could have been sent off to Vietnam, but he wasn't allowed to drink. But women were, and women weren't, sent off to Vietnam. So, I don't know where feminism comes into this. Is my
I
It
can
point.
was after
I,
Vietnam, by the way.
I can
Oh,
talk a
it's
little
And
bit
after.
on
even
Okay.
this. So
even if but really fast, even if feminism did directly are responsible for this, what a small thing. I mean, 42 years ago they changed Oklahoma's drinking age. Okay, but they're still fighting against male victims of domestic violence today. They're still fighting against, in a way, homeless men having easy access today. They're still stopping the conversation on male issues today, right now. So pointing out to one obscure law 42 years ago does not prove that feminism helps men.
this article itself, even using this as an example, is highly disingenuous because a good part of that case was that SCOTUS looked at the statistics, and while it was true men were more likely to engage in driving while drunk, the state was able to achieve its safety goal by raising the drinking age for everyone. So the goal was able to be achieved without discriminatory means, which meant that the state had no reason to employ discriminatory means to achieve it. That the statistics were arbitrary in um, like breaking it down by gender was arbitrary to them being able to achieve their goal. So really, this didn't repeal a law that discriminated against men. It just raised the drinking age in Oklahoma to 21 for everybody. It literally changed nothing for men.
Also, another thing, if you actually do some research on the trial, like was already pointed out, it had absolutely nothing to do with women. It was, if I remember correctly, it was like two guys who essentially realized that the group of women they were with could buy drinks, but they couldn't when they were both essentially the same age. It didn't make sense to them, and so they took it to the Supreme Court and they won because it doesn't make sense. So it wasn't necessarily a feminist thing. It was just a court case thing, and there was no real feminist involvement. So I don't understand why this is a feminism point. Doesn't really make sense.
I have
They're
a
It's
gonna
not
just
theory.
because
try to claim it because RBG made a comment. Also, a person who was also part of the case was a woman who happened to be a vendor of alcohol, who pointed out that the discriminatory law was actually causing businesses that are involved with alcohol to have a huge loss.
Yeah, I think their angle here is probably Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a feminist or something. Or maybe it's just they're doing their usual thing of saying any gender thing that happens that is good or is considered good, at least, anything that happens is because we did it. You see the same sort of thing with feminists claiming that they are the ones who were fighting against the draft and stuff like that. You never see feminists fighting against the draft. Sometimes they'll release some little comment that's anti-war or stuff like that. They don't really fight against the draft. It's just
Anything in
like
general. That was my problem with the first point about them boosting the economy. It has nothing to do with feminism at all. It has to do with the amount of people which suddenly entered the workforce. It had to do with the personal allocation of that people chose within the workforce. If you look at stats, you realize that women go into secretarial jobs, they go into more office jobs, men go into more manufacturing. And so then you sort of have a situation where you have people going into roles which they fit better because of the fact that more people decide to start entering the workforce after the war. It has nothing to do with feminism at all. It never did. And yet they want to call it, oh, it's something feminism did. They just put their title on anything that's ever happened.
I think my Ginsburg theory might have been correct. If you could read the next one.
Should I read it?
Go on.
Okay, so it made life a little easier for single men. Over the course of their lengthy legal careers, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her husband joined forces only once to advocate for single men. The case, Moritz versus Commissioner, challenged the fact that not all men could request dependent care deductions. Although tax deductions were given to women, widowers and divorced men, single males, slipped through the cracks. Ending this discriminatory policy was one of Ginsburg's many victories using the 14th Amendment to end the enshrinement of gender discrimination into law.
Okay, feminists cannot possibly talk about family court and divorced men or male paternity rights to any degree or to any extent as something that they've done to benefit men, or what they've done to benefit single fathers, or what they've done to benefit men in any aspect of family court. Just because they can point to this one small little thing, the overall picture of what feminists have done in family court is so hideously, outrageously sexist that it's outrageous for them to even bring up how they made life better for single men or single fathers or widowed fathers or anything else.
Well, and another thing too is they keep bringing up Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She wasn't even a feminist. Everyone says she was a feminist. She never ever said that. She never said she was a feminist. She never picked up that title. She simply did the thing that she thought was right, which a lot of times happened to be for gender equality, but that didn't make her a feminist.
And she came
if she
out
was.
being a gender equalist as well. She never full out came saying, I'm a feminist. They just made her one of the icons.
And even if she was, that's not feminism doing something. That's one of 9 Supreme Court justices being involved in the majority vote.
Okay, so the next one is they legalized birth control, and birth control is good for men.
Well, she didn't vote
they
on
say.
that. She was the lawyer for that case, just to correct that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to have you read out the next one because it involves like bedroom stuff again. But the gist of it is that birth control helps men because it like means that men get to like do more bedroom stuff without consequences. But
Right.
honestly, that's just like they didn't invent the pill. The pill was invented by a man, so it's like
that was the benefit for men was a byproduct of the benefit for women. And I'm not against birth control by any means, so I'm not saying that it was wrong to invent birth control. But don't say that was something that feminists did to help men. It may have inadvertently, indirectly had that effect, but it was not done with men in mind.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't. Number 6, if you could read that one, it's basically the same point, actually.
I'll read it. It gave men more reproductive control through abortion legalization. Although the burdens of pregnancy and childbirth biologically fall on women, men bear the consequences of children too, because the expansion of reproductive rights affect their personal lives. They are a central part of the conversation. Neil Dash believes that liberating women ultimately gives men more freedom. I see as a husband, a father, and a friend to other husbands and fathers who have been in the same situation that we've been able to better serve our families and our communities because our wives and partners have had authority over what happens with their bodies. He told Policy Mike, freeing women to have control frees us men who have built our lives with them. That's why Neural organizes events like Men for Choice, where men can coalesce around issues of reproductive justice. According to Samantha Gordon, Director of Public Affairs in Neural, they've been a huge success. Men have showed up and raised money towards helping families get access to the services and information they need. Gordon told Policy Mike that it's a priority for Neural to reach out to men and really make them feel involved, so these types of fundraisers have become a perfect way to do that. Another important lesser-known fact is that men get abortions too. When we only view abortion as a women's issue, we exclude gender nonconforming or trans people who need abortions every year.
Okay, so I think putting aside the issue completely of whether or not abortion is good and all the trans stuff, because honestly, that's just another huge rabbit hole. Let's point out again that this is still something which they say helps women, which they are claiming has a periphery benefit to men. Now, you'll note that men can't really benefit from this directly. They can't actually like say that they want this. They can't get the woman to take the pill. They can't get the woman to take the abortion. They just like, I mean, what if the man wanted to keep the baby and the woman is like, no? What if it's like they've been spending decades saying it's her body and it's her choice. So where does the benefit for men factor in here? They're just boiling it down to one thing, which is you get to have more time in the bedroom, and that doesn't really that's not really meaningful when the man still has no control over his reproduction. So the man is trusting that the woman does all these things and doesn't there's no real benefit here, is what I'm saying.
I think the other problem too is this article says, when we only view abortion as a women's issue, saying that feminism doesn't view it as a women's issue, and yet feminism has very clearly on multiple occasions made it apparent that they do view it as a women's only issue. Yes, it is the body of the woman, but the reality of it is there's two entities to every child. And
Tell you right now, they
if
just
you
screw you
look
over. They
at
don't
the
care about the
protests
guys
happening,
thing.
yeah, we look at the protests on the streets. I mean, half of them are hating on the male half, viewing them as the problem. When you hear the issue word. Now, most cases, obviously, it's spoken about between the two people, but it's still something where this article is trying to claim it. Oh, well, if you only view it abortion as a women's issue, saying that feminism doesn't view as only women's issue, and yet that's all you see around feminist organizations. It's all you see on the streets, is that it's only a women's issue.
Yeah, we have to bring up this point that EE has gotten into hot water with their customers this week because they've been putting up posters that essentially say that women are the only victims of online harassment and men are the only perpetrators. So, I mean, there are studies saying that half of all sexist comments against women alone are from other women. So, I mean, they didn't look into men because obviously these are feminist influence studies, and feminist influence studies don't actually look at the male side, they just look at the female side. So they only look at female victims and male perpetrators. So this is honestly, it's just it's just their typical PR. This entire article is just their typical PR trick of saying, oh, we help men too. But then when you actually ask them for help, they're like, no, we're not going to help men, not until we've solved all women's issues. Or they'll say, well, you need to make your own movement. And then when you make your own movement like we have, they say, you're far right. And they attack you and all that sort of stuff.
Well, and another thing I'm realizing too is they're exaggerating how much influence they have and pretending like they do way more than they do. This entire article is essentially them saying, we help feed the homeless, and they really don't. They just let them dig out of the trash. And it's like, okay, but that's not the same as donating to the homeless. They're making it seem like they're very active in helping men, and they're not. Right? Men get the figurative scraps from the table, as it were, of their efforts, which usually isn't even intentional. They're not even trying to help men. Most of the time, these efforts are actually to help women, and helping men is just a byproduct.
It's also worth noting that an editor from Miss Magazine has gone on videos stating that back during the time of when abortion was like first becoming like an issue that activists were talking about. Feminists were all pro-life, and it was actually men coming into magazines like Miss Magazine and saying that we're going to advocate for abortion, that then they had to do these pro-abortion articles all the time and stuff like that, and like advocate for it constantly, and that is what changed people's views. The magazines, being co-opted and twisted towards this thing, quite probably by the medical industry trying to make a buck out of abortion. So the video is linked to on our citations list. You can go and see it if you want. It's all there. It's it's not really a conspiracy theory. It's more just like corporate interests being corporate interests. Anyway, would you like to move on to the next one? And who would like to read out the next one?
I'll do it again because talking about Miss Magazine, it triggered the FBI to change the definition of rape to include men. Did you know that until recently, the FBI's definition of rape was an old-fashioned as the horse and buggy? That is, until feminist activists decided to change that, thanks to the Rape is Rape campaign launched by the Feminist Majority Foundation and Miss Magazine, more than 160,000 emails were sent to the FBI pressuring it to change its archaic definition of rape. The old definition, carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will, hadn't been changed since 1921. It meant that many types of sexual assaults, including the rape of men, weren't counted as part of the Bureau's annual Uniform Crime Report. When the decision was announced, then VP and General Counsel of the Feminist Majority Foundation, Kim Gandy, said, "This is a major policy change and will dramatically impact the way rape is tracked and reported nationwide." The new definition now includes all forms of penetration and no longer excludes men. There you
go. Okay, so we have to be intellectually honest and say, okay, this was a genuinely good thing that feminists did. That's fair enough. Let's not be like the way Americans are so divided today. They think that the other side is wrong 100% of the time and never do anything good. Yeah, sure, this was a good thing that feminists did. But I'm thinking about the 2013 case in India where the government wanted to make rape laws gender neutral, and it was feminist groups who protested saying, no, we don't think that men should be included in rape laws, and we don't think that male rape victims should have equal protection and equal status under the law, because there's a risk that these male victims are actually rapists who are making counter accusations as their defense claim. And when I went on Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and the Ask Feminist subreddit and 2X Chromosomes, the subreddits, this was widely defended by feminists. Not exclusively. There were some feminists who agreed with me. I will give credit where credit is due. But I specifically recall they shall remain. Sorry, my throat's all dry. Remain nameless, but some current moderators of the Ask Feminist subreddit told me that, well, because I'm not really from India, then I don't really have any right to question this decision because I don't understand the nuances of Indian culture, so therefore I'm not in a position to say whether or not male victims in India should have legal protection and legal status. Because I don't understand Indian culture, I don't know if rape victims should be protected under law. Okay, so I could say you don't understand Arabic culture, so then you don't know if it's fair or not to restrict women from driving in Saudi Arabia. I mean, how ridiculous is that argument? So, but okay, this was good, but it would be nice if feminists today followed up on this. And I think in the UK, if I recall correctly, male rape is still not recognized as an equal crime. Is that correct?
Another issue too is even. Sorry, Ma.
Yeah, because I know Ma knows a lot about this.
Yeah, I just wanted to butt in say that they also did this in Israel. This is something they did in Israel as well, and they were successful there as well, using the same arguments. And I also want to be clear that the Rape is Rape campaign, they may have changed the FBI definition, but the current FBI definition is that rape is penetration, no matter how slight, of the vaginal or the vagina or anus with any body parts or object. So basically, what I'm saying here is they included gay men being like gay rapists, like that's as far as it went.
They
Now,
didn't include men being victims of female rape, and they also another thing they didn't tell you in the article, which I actually posted in the chat. If you look in the chat, the actual Miss Magazine article even acknowledges, if you look at the last sentence of the quote, we believe that updating and broadening this archaic definition to count the vast majority of rapes will result in more resources to curb what has been an intolerable level of violence, especially against women. This was never an intent to help men. This was 100% about helping women. And anything that came for men was, again, just a byproduct. Men were never the focus. In fact, if you read that entire article, it's very obvious that all they cared about were the women. They barely ever mention the men. Right? And when they do mention it, it's usually alongside statistics that show, 1 in 5 women for every 1 to 72 men. Like, it's always basically saying women experience this much more than men. That's when they bring up the men. So it's ironic that they bring this up as feminism caring about men, when the very article that they're quoting this from shows that they really don't. Sorry, go ahead, Dark.
Yeah, Ma, if you don't mind, I'm going to tear up this UCR definition / updated definition by the FBI as well. The next part, oral penetration by a sex organ of another person. So, oral penetration referring to a penis penetrating something, because a vagina can't penetrate, by a sex organ of another person. Oral penetration going the mouth. That's very confusing on its own, and it's very detailed and vague at the same time, but it just makes it sound like if you were a man and you forced oral penetration, it's rape. Penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus. So that doesn't include the vagina towards the penis at all. So there's no female rape on males. And here's another thing, without consent of the victim. Consent is so important and yet so vague at the same time. Because the definition of consent keeps changing. It's written down, and the written portion is not changed. But the social definition of consent is consistently changing all the time.
Yeah, something that I think that what we have here is another case of pretty much what happened in India. What happened in India was the Indian law was essentially the same as like the old American law. It was like it specifically said a man, forcing a woman. So they then took that law, and the government was like, hey, maybe we should equalize this a bit. And they came out with this completely gender neutral law, which looked really good. It was very, very progressive as far as our version of progressive is. And then the feminists come out of the woodwork and say, no, this is going to hurt women. And they back down immediately, of course. And what I think this shows is that the FBI definition of rape, I don't think that feminists were ever campaigning for the vague victim person sort of language in that. I think that they just wanted to be sure that no matter what part of the woman the man stuck, was like doing things to against her will, the no matter what part, the law would cover that. But I doubt they ever anticipated or even wanted the law to specifically say people, which included gay men now. Now, what we can say is that people like Mary Koss, who is a feminist, and other feminist campaigners, gender studies people, and so on, have been fighting for decades and decades to make sure that men, women raping men, which is it's specifically called forced to penetrate or made to penetrate, they have made sure that that is bundled into sexual assault statistics instead of actual rape statistics, and they're trying to break it down as much as possible and keep it well away from the rape side of things. And they've made sure that England doesn't have a rape law for men. Instead, they have this weird forced to have sex against your will law, which is very strangely named. It's almost tongue-in-cheek, and it's considered a form of sexual assault rather than actual rape. So what I'm saying here is that they've basically done all they can to hide this, which is why you won't see men being raped particularly rated highly in statistics. This is why they can say 1 in 70 men and 1 in 4 women. It's because they include sexual assault under rape in the woman category, and they do not actually bundle actual forms of rape into the men category. So the only real way that a man can be raped by their definition is by another man. It's grossly unethical, statistical, and activist behavior. Does anyone else have anything to say about that? Otherwise, we'll just move on because we've got to get through these quite quickly. There's quite a lot.
No, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that one was 100% cap just from looking at the actual article that they referenced. They made it clear that all they care about is women. It's literally in the wording. So.
Okay, so number 8. This one's going to be quite amusing if you remember that feminism has led to mass unemployment for men. If somebody would like to read it out.
I could read it.
Yeah, just so you know, I'm on my phone right now, so please don't ask me to read because I can't really scroll that fast. Sorry.
We're not going to ask you to read. It's all right. Just carry on.
It gave men some well-deserved time off from work. Prior to the Family and Medical Leave Act, workers in the United States didn't have any protection under the law from family or medical-related leave. That meant that your boss could legally fire you for taking time off to care for your kids, yourself, or a sick relative. The impetus for the law came after the formal recognition that the lack of employment policies to accommodate working parents can force individuals to choose between job security and parenting, and that due to the nature of the roles of men and women in our society, the primary responsibility for family caretaking often falls on women. The law ensures 12 weeks of unpaid leave for all U.S. workers for every 12-month period to care for themselves or a loved one. Although women were at the forefront of this fight, it allowed all workers to acquire much-deserved time off for caretaking. The National Organization for Women and many other women's organizations believe the law didn't go far enough, however, and it's fighting for expansions to provide workers with paid leave that would benefit all workers, male and female.
Now, I don't actually know if this one's true or not because I haven't actually looked into paid leave specifically. But it does sound like yet another example of feminists demanding something for women and the government, by some miracle, giving it to everyone. And I'm not entirely sure how true this is because I've heard that paternity leave in a lot of places is very, very, very hard to get. You are not legally entitled to paternity leave in a lot of places, and in some places it's actually very recent that paternity leave has been included. Maternity leave, on the other hand, has been very widespread for a long time. I don't know if anyone else has more experience with that one than me. But I mean, if it's true, I'm willing to give them that they did something good. But at the same time, does that really balance out all the bad things they've done for men, specifically men? Because most of the things they do seem to be bad for men in some way.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their original claim, I mean, it was essentially about women. It was about getting longer paternity leave, and it was about getting paid paternity leave when they didn't previously have paternity leave, and a guaranteed job when they got back from paternity leave, essentially not being fired, so having the job security. It was not meant to be given to men, so you pretty much hit the nail on the head. They asked for it for women, and then men got men got it, essentially men again got the leftovers, and they're like, look, we helped you guys too. Yeah, by accident. Hooray. So
Okay, let's
the
move on
worst
to the next.
sorry, I was just going to say the worst part is you can find most of this out just by doing Google searches, but it shows that they're so focused on and driving a narrative. Carry on.
Yeah, if you could just read the next one, please.
I'll read it.
Okay.
It helped male survivors of violence in the military pursue justice. Despite the fact that most of the concerted efforts to eradicate sexual assault in the military has come from female politicians, such as Republican Jackie Spire and Senator Claire McCaskill, laws intended to curb sexual assault affect men just as much as women. Women may be more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than be killed through enemy combat, but overall, the majority of military sexual assault victims are male. That's why organizations like Male Survivor or Men Can End Rape are so important to make sure that men have a chance to make their voices heard.
Those sound
Okay.
like men's organizations. Could you read out the names of those groups again? The two groups she mentioned at the end?
Male
are.
Survivor or Men Can End Rape.
I've been on the Men Can End Rape site, and it sounds like it is just what it sounds like. It seems a little bit covert, and they may be, I don't know, softening their actual message. But what their actual message is, if you look at the page I've linked, is that male violence against women is what drives rape. And that's very interesting when they're citing that organization, because I think what's happened here is the typical women entered the military, women started to encounter being raped, therefore they started to push for greater accountability in the military, and voila, you've ended up with this system, which is actually one of the fairer systems regarding male
You know what I'd like
victims.
them to talk about? I'm sorry. I hate this word. I got friends in the military. I would like them to speak up about the amount of military women who are willing to lie, to stay at a base, to not go to war, to skip certain trainings. I'd like them to talk about that. That would be very
Katrina, I mean, if you have knowledge about this or any stories, do you want to be more specific and talk about it? If it's
Sure.
private, then if it's like, if you'd rather not talk about someone's private thing, then that's fine. But it's interesting.
Oh, well, I don't really know. Thankfully, this hasn't happened to any of my friends yet. Emphasis on yet. It happens a lot more often than anyone wants to give off. I know recently I was catching up with a friend. They were telling me how their bunker mate was just randomly pulled aside by their commander and they were told that they were going to. I'm trying to remember the story. They were pulled aside and they ended up missing the training for that morning. And they came back to the bunkers. They were talking, and he told my friend, apparently, I've been told I've raped a person. And find out one other person in the hallway that they're in with the bunkers was also accused of rape by this guy's girlfriend. 2 military people, military male, military female, were dating, and they were trying to switch her to another base. They were in North Carolina. I guess she was being moved back to California, is my understanding. And she lied saying she got raped, because if you say you were assaulted or raped in the military, they have to hold you back and keep you there until the investigation is finished and everything's been looked through and they determine what's happened. And apparently she didn't want to be separate from her boyfriend, so she lied. And we know she lied because on one of the thankful notes here, though, the person she was bunking with overheard her on the phone with her mother talking about how she had falsely accused these boys. And she recorded and showed the commander.
Okay, so
They
a little bit
mentioned
about
how this happens on a regular basis.
It's pretty awful. Little update. Basically, one of the organizations they mentioned there is a feminist organization called Men Can End Rape, basically. And their modus is that men are rapists and therefore men can act together to stop rape. And that's the entire thing. The other organization I haven't looked at, but Logical thinks it's an MRA organization.
Real quick note: is it men commends rape or men condemn rape?
I'm not sure I follow. I don't think I think I said condemn. Did I?
Okay, because maybe it was just my dyslexic ears. I thought you said commends, which would be a very strange name.
No. It's Men Can End Rape.
Oh, okay. Can ends. I thought. Okay. That makes sense. For a second there, for some reason, my brain processed it as men commends rape, and I was thinking, what? Okay, sorry. Go on.
Actually, it's Men Can Stop Rape, but it's the same thing. Yeah, the it seems an awful lot like the other organisation is an MRA organisation, which just goes to show that the feminists will take MRA victories. You know, as soon as we win them, they'll claim that they're feminist victories. But before that, they will fight them every inch of the way. They'll fight them, and then they'll claim that they're their victories. It's insane, but it's very, very politically expedient, let's say.
And what's interesting is, doing some more reading on the site, if you actually look at the website, it says essentially that it's inclusive to all demographics. So even though they come off like an MRA group, when you actually do research, basically they're like a lot of other groups that say we focus on men, but then they're like, well, actually, we try and focus on everyone because it crosses lines of, gender demographics and blah blah blah. In other words, they probably don't focus on men. So actually, I take that back. This one's just a lot more well hidden because they put it on the surface like they support men, but no, they just hit it lower.
Fair enough. Okay, we need to move on very quickly. We haven't even got through a fraction of this article. It's a very long article. Well, actually, I think we're about halfway now. Yeah, we're halfway. But we need to go through these very, very quickly. And I think we may have to make this a two-parter because I have to leave very soon.
Okay, so 10 then?
Yep.
Okay. It ensured that the burden of war doesn't only fall on male shoulders. When the U.S. Department of Defense decided to end the discriminatory policy of banning women from combat roles in the military, It didn't only help female soldiers, it benefited their male peers too. Allowing women on the front lines in 2013 opened up 237,000 military jobs that were previously off limits to females, which gave relief to the male members of the military. Charles Clymer, a Policy Mike columnist and Army veteran, said that everyone benefits from women entering combat roles. When we do this, we're doubling our potential for greatness in military leadership instead of limiting ourselves by eliminating half our available talent. Further studies have shown that mixed gender units demonstrate smarter thinking, he told Policy Mike. However, Clymer believes that this takes some pressure off men. Because 85% of our military is male, this reduces an unfair burden placed on men to take on dangerous assignments for our national security. Feminists have always recognized the injustice of drafting only men, and as a man and a veteran, that shows me that they are just as much about men as they do women. He said. Okay, so
I think this one's pretty
I have to
debatable.
say- Well, this I have to say
No, I
is we have to give some fair credit here because now National Organization for Women actually teamed up with the NCFM on this one. So that is true. My question would be, if there was a war, let's say the US had a war with China, like a mass mobilization war, and women were drafted, when they say women would see combat roles, do you really think women would see frontline infantry duty to the same degree as men? I don't know. I'm not
I
saying
can
they
tell you
wouldn't.
right now the answer is no.
My
Is that a
inkling would be
bad
no.
thing though? That sounds horrible, but I think I'm just looking at this that I'm in so many forums for men's rights. I've seen the argument also of who makes better soldiers and talk about male physicality versus women physicality. So it's horrible that men are going to be mainly on the front lines. You don't want anyone to die, but at the same time, it makes more sense for when it comes to success within war.
And that's
It's
and
not
that
even
probably would I mean that's probably how it would play out. I think exactly
you
what
have
you
to-
know.
Sorry.
I might counter by saying, a woman is a smaller target and assault rifles are not all that heavy. But I do think that if there was a war to break out, I think what Katrina said is probably what would happen. I think probably there would be an article saying, well, to reduce casualty numbers, it makes sense to have men take more frontline roles. Women would still be, truck drivers or working artillery fields or doing radar operations or things like that. But I don't think a gender neutral draft would be a gender equal draft. I still think that it would be mostly men in the most dangerous roles.
Okay, so let me just say also, it's not just in size and physicality. Yes, men are much faster and they're also much stronger and they can carry a lot more gear, but they can also carry gear for longer. They perform much better in obstacle testing. They perform much better in mobile unit testing. They perform much better in team unit testing. What's it called? They have men have higher visuospatial reasoning, right? We have a much lower risk of getting PTSD. Like the amount of things that we have advantages of as far as like war goes, it's a very, very long list. And there's a reason why, I have friends who are in the military. I have a friend, he's an artilleryman, and he says like everyone there hates the groups that are like mixed gender because they drag everyone down, right? They're not as effective. And most of the time the standards were lowered and then they were lowered again just so that the women could pass, right? So that they're lowering the standards even so that the women can pass and be in the military in the first place. Because if they kept the same standard of entry, right, they wouldn't even be able to get in the first place. So, and it's interesting that he talks about this study that points out that they do smarter thinking, quote unquote. Yeah, because that's like the only thing they do better at. If you look at literally every other metric, they fail miserably. They did a bunch of studies on this and they were terrible in every other aspect. So, I don't know where this guy came from. And it's funny because they say he's a veteran. I don't know. I don't think he's actually ever been in a gendered unit because I don't think he would be promoting it this highly.
I notice also that they say they're talking about the leadership specifically in this. Like it's going to be like they don't want to be the grunts, they want to be the leaders. That's what it boils down to. And I think this is pretty much just I mean, you can argue that women are a massive help in policing because they can do certain things that men can't. Men can do certain things that women can't, so it's complementary. I've seen little tiny female police officers back up actual full-blooded Nazis, like actual literal Nazis, will back away from a tiny little female police officer because they don't want to hurt them. And so, female police officers can use that against big burly men. So the size difference doesn't necessarily mean anything as long as you're using it. You're using both genders tactically. So there's an argument to be made there.
I think that's a very, very rare circumstance. Most times in war, you're both trying to kill each other, and the guy on the other side doesn't care if it's a woman or a man. He just knows you're in the way.
Oh, I was talking about the police specifically. I wasn't referring to war.
Yeah.
No. Whereas in war, it's... Yeah, I think this is a point where we have to say that it could be dangerous to the men there if the women are involved, but obviously I haven't actually looked into this, so I'm just going to have to take your word for it on it. But it does sound about right. I have seen some videos of female soldiers, and they don't seem very competent, to be honest. And
it's not even that they're not competent. And I honestly feel bad for them because a lot of them try. They do try really hard. They do train really hard, but they just can't physically compete. It's not the same. And I don't know. Part of it is also just the mental aspect too. I think it's not even like a worse thing. It's just a different thing, right? We're designed for different things, and that really shows in certain arenas. War is one of them.
Yeah, and there might be some small circumstances where they are useful, but I'm not going to come down on this one. But I don't think it's the big helpful thing they think it is. The next one.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely not.
Yeah, let's just do one more because I've really got to go.
Before we do, let me just make one point when it comes to female soldiers. There were some very successful Soviet female units in World War II. So there is a proven track record for field duty infantry female units being successful.
Those might have been non-mixed units, so I have a feeling they weren't. There was the Air Witches, who were an all-female squadron. They weren't a mixed squadron, so the problem here might partially be, it might be two things. One, putting them directly on the front lines, and two, putting them into mixed groups. So there's probably some leeway there. If you put them in a non-mixed group, you could probably put them into some specialist role. But, at the same time, I kind of do want the equality. I do actually want women to succeed in the army because I do like equality. So I'm not at all saying that they shouldn't, that I don't want them there. It's I'm just in two minds about it because, anyway, let's move on to the next one. This is going to have to be the last one. If you could only read out the first paragraph, because we don't want to. Actually, no, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop. That's my alarm going off in the background. So, Darkisha, if you could take us out very quickly.
Sure. This has been the Men Human Rights Discord chat, our Saturday live stream that we have every Saturday at 3 p.m. UK, 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. We always love hearing what you guys have to say. This week has been an amazing chat. If you ever have recommendations for topics, let Ma or Blue or myself know. Otherwise, have a good day, and we'll see you all next week.